Hello, explorers. I'm Pam Larikia, and this is episode number 154 of the podcast. It's the 12th of December, 2018, as I record this intro. So this week on the podcast, I have a fantastic conversation with Jeremy Stuart. Jeremy is an unschooling dad and video editor who also directed and co-produced the documentary film Class Dismissed, which was released in 2015. Since then, it's been screened in more than 60 countries and translated into 5 languages. He's now in the home stretch of producing a second documentary, Self-Taught, which looks at the question, what happens when they become adults? So if you're as excited after the conversation as I was, please take a moment to check out his Kickstarter to cover his post-production costs. And that's before it ends at 1 p.m. on Friday, December the 21st. As a personal update, this week and next are pretty much all podcast all the time, with a bit of holiday prep thrown in. I'm getting the December 27th episode ready now, and I'm happily writing tons of questions and recording calls for the January episodes in hopes of avoiding the stressful rush at the beginning of the year. And so far, it's looking good. As always, I want to thank everyone who has chosen to support my unschooling work like this podcast and my website through Patreon. And a big welcome to new patron Jennifer Yost. I hope I said that right. But hi, Jen. Thanks so much for joining us. I deeply appreciate all my patrons. Their generous support is vital to helping me freely share information and inspiration with anyone who's curious and wants to explore the fascinating world of unschooling. If you'd like to join my community of patrons and scoop up some great rewards along the way, check out the Exploring Unschooling page at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/exploring unschooling. And without further ado, let's get to my conversation with Jeremy. Welcome. I'm Pam Larikia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Jeremy Stuart. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Pam. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Now, Jeremy is an unschooling dad and video editor who also directed and co-produced the documentary film Class Dismissed, which you've probably heard of. Class Dismissed has been screened in more than 60 countries and translated into 5 languages. And he's also working on a new documentary, which we will also talk about. But to get us started, Jeremy, can you share with us a bit about you and your family?
Sure, yeah. So we have a daughter who's now 14, who has never been to school, never set foot in the school since the beginning. And I guess I can share a little bit about how we got started. Is that what you're asking?
Well, yeah, that would kind of lead us nicely into the next question, which is how you discovered unschooling and what that move looked like. So that would be great.
Sure, yeah. So my wife and I, when we had our daughter, we started around the age of 2, when she was 2, starting to talk about, well, what were we going to do for, education, like the school thing, the school subject came up, like, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
And, and at that time, I really knew nothing at all about homeschooling or unschooling, certainly unschooling, but even homeschooling, really knew nothing about it. It was not on my radar at all. Mm-hmm. And, we started reflecting on our own personal schooling experiences, and I grew up in London, England, and went to a very traditional school. And my high school was an all-boys school.
Yeah.
So I had the very traditional kind of school upbringing. And my middle school years were pretty good. I sort of followed along. I did what you were supposed to do and, studied and got reasonable grades and, was doing the whole thing. Yeah. And then when I got to high school, everything shifted. I got to high school and suddenly I felt like all these doors were closing in my face. And I distinctly remember having a career counseling meeting. I was about 15 or so. And, they had these career counselors would come in and talk to all the students about what do you want to be when you grow up? And at that time, I was really, really interested in music. I was a drummer, and that's really what I wanted to do with my life. And I remember at this meeting, they sat me down and said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up, Jeremy? And I said, well, I want to be a rock star. And they said, well, that's not a job. Here's a list of jobs that you might be interested in. And, they gave me this piece of paper with all these jobs listed. And, rock star wasn't on there. And I said, well, where's rock star? It's not on there. And they said, well, that's not a job. And I said, well, yes, it is. There's, I listen to a lot of music. There's lots of bands that I like, and I want to be in a band, and I want to be a professional musician. And they said, well, you need a backup plan. You should find something on this list. How about a lawyer or a doctor? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So at that point, I suddenly realized, this is not really serving me very well.
Yeah.
And so my whole attitude to school really drastically shifted, and I became very disillusioned with the whole process. Like I wanted to study art, for instance, but I was obviously studying music, and they said, well, you can't do music and art because they're both creatives. You have to pick one or the other. And I'm like, but I want to do both. And they said, well, you can't. So I'm like, oh, God. So it's just like, it was so frustrating.
Yeah.
So as my wife and I were kind of discussing school and our own experiences with school, she said, well, why don't we look into homeschooling? And I'm like, what? What? Are you crazy? What? So she gave me this book by John Holt, How Children Fail. And I read that book, and it just blew my mind. It was just like, it resonated with me so much because of my own personal experience with school. So I left high school. I couldn't wait to get out. It's like the second I could get out, I was done. Never went back, never went to college. It's like, I'm done. That's it. Mm-hmm. So this book really resonated. And as I started reading more and we were researching online about all of this, it started to really make some sense. And then we went to the California Homeschool Association conference that they have every year. Yeah. And Kaya, our daughter, was about 2.5, 3 maybe. And we went just to sort of fact gather. We wanted to see, well, what is this all about? Who are these strange homeschoolers? Let's go see what this is all about. And so we went to the conference, and we had our little, badges on that said first timers, so we were like deer in the headlights, kind of wandering around. Whoa. And we were checking into the hotel, and this young girl who was probably no older than about 7 or 8, who was staying in the room next to us, just came right up to me, looked me right in the eye, and said, oh, you're a newbie? Well, welcome to the conference. I've been coming for 7 years. I know everything. I know where everything is. If you need any help with anything, let me know. Oh, and by the way, I play fiddle. And if you'd like a concert tonight, I'm staying right next door.
Oh.
And I was completely speechless. I had never been approached by a kid of that age who was so confident, so in control of herself, and so comfortable talking to me and making eye contact. I was just like bowled over. I couldn't believe it. And so we did actually go into her room the next evening and have a little concert. She gave us a little concert, and she helped us show us around a little bit. And the whole weekend was filled with these incredible experiences interacting with these kids, teens and kids of all ages, Mm-hmm. As you know, I mean, there was no issue with teens hanging out with little ones and talking to adults and looking them in the eye and this whole thing. So that was my introduction to homeschooling. And at the end of the weekend, I said to Kim, my wife, I said, wow, these kids, there's something different about them. Like, if this is a result of this homeschooling thing, then sign me up. I'm in, like 2 thumbs up. So that's what we started doing. And so it became pretty obvious that our daughter was not going to go to school and that we were just going to, try this homeschooling thing. But then, then it was a question of, well, how do we do this exactly? And, for us, we were, attachment parenting. And, so we sort of already living in that sort of paradigm of like non-authoritarian upbringing for our daughter. We both had fathers that were very dominant, and I didn't want to be that way. And, Kim didn't want to be that way. And so we were trying to raise our daughter very differently with the idea of, partnership parenting and attachment parenting. And so this whole notion of unschooling just kind of fit right in with that. And it wasn't like we just decided, okay, we're going to be unschoolers, because I don't really like labels.
Yeah.
I just was like, well, we're just going to live. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing now. We hang out together, we play together, we learn together, we live in the world together, we travel, we have experiences. Let's just keep doing that and see how that goes. And as it turned out, later I sort of learned, well, that's kind of unschooling in a way. So that's kind of how we began, and we've been doing that ever since.
I love that story.
It's been an incredible journey. It really has. Yeah.
I loved the way when you were describing the HSC conference, right? It's like a whole nother world, isn't it? When you
Yes.
that first time you drop into it and you go, wow, these are people and kids just like everywhere else, but it's a whole different, not only atmosphere, but the people are engaging differently with each other and with the world, aren't they? It's so fresh.
It really is. And then also it was helpful to know that, okay, we're not weird, for thinking this, like, here we are saying we're not going to send our daughter to school. That's really like weird and radical in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
But being in that conference, we realized, well, no, there's 1,000 families here and they're all doing the same thing, essentially, right? So, it's not that weird. And in fact, I would say now that that's actually really, really normal. And I wish it was more normal.
Right? It's more normal for being a human being, right? For being
it is,
yourself.
The idea of sending our daughter off to, to school, to strangers, to essentially raise her and influence her, in all kinds of ways, just seems really bizarre to me now, I can't think of why you would want to do that. But anyway.
Yeah. I remember too when, I hadn't even heard of homeschooling, when my kids were first, when my eldest was hitting school age. So, I kind of thought that was the only choice.
Right.
Yet I was still, so much, and I hadn't heard the term attachment parenting either. Although, now when I look back, that's what we were doing, because that's just what felt right and made so much sense to me. And I was still, working with my kids as they were going to school, chatting with them, validating their experiences, figuring out ways, for it to work better for them, etc. But anyway, once I'd found homeschooling, it was like that experience at the conference, or even like reading that John Holt book you mentioned. It was like mind blown. It's like, this was that last piece of the puzzle I was waiting for, right?
Yeah.
And then, and then I found, like you said, this seems normal, hanging out with these people that make so much sense to me. I found I ended up kind of moving the way the people that I hung out with, you know what I mean? Because so often when I was with more, I guess, conventional parenting, etc., I felt very alone. It's like, okay, and if I mentioned anything or had any questions, the answers were always, well, put them in school then. They weren't the kinds of answers and stuff I was looking for. So it was very nice to find this whole community out there to which this lifestyle was normal.
Right.
And to be able to interact with them and chat with them and hear about their experiences, that was such an important part of my journey. Did you find that?
Yeah, and I think it's really important. That sense of community is really important. If for those people that choose to unschool or homeschool, it's really important to connect with other people in your community that are doing the same thing, because it can be very isolating and lonely otherwise, and you do feel ostracized and like you're on the fringes of society sometimes. Because people, a lot of people just don't understand it. They don't get it. Even the word homeschooling, they have certain images in their mind about what that looks like, and they think it's weird and odd, and your kids are never going to be socialized, and all this kind of stuff, and so there's all this negative sort of connotations around the terms and just the practice itself. So it's super important to connect with community.
Yeah, and it really helps just immersing yourself in it, because I find my learning happens better, whatever the topic, when I immerse myself in it, right? Whether it's writing or unschooling or whatever it is that I'm interested in, that's a way that I learn really well, is to immerse myself in it, because then the connections are popping all over the place.
Right, for sure.
Yeah. So I was curious, what has surprised you most so far about how unschooling has unfolded in your lives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting because, as you know, it's a continually evolving process.
Yeah. And
when I look at this process, the only thing I can really go back to is my own sort of personal experience of it. Like, how has it been for me, and what sort of roadblocks and things do I run into along the way? And so much of this process has been about deschooling myself. Like unraveling the sort of conditioned ideas that I was given, either by my parents or through my traditional schooling, that I have to then kind of disassemble in order to see beyond them.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, like, as I said, I grew up in a family that, wonderful parents. They did the best they could, but my father was very authoritarian,
Mm-hmm.
very strict, laid down the law. You didn't question that. And that's not how I am. And yet a part of that is in there still.
Yeah.
I hear that voice come up in me, and that's been one of the biggest challenges, I guess, in all of this, is when that comes up, when that raises its head, I have to catch it and go, wait, that's my parent's voice or my father's voice. That's not mine. So
Mm-hmm.
how do I shift that? How do I, let that go? And that's a constant process that's evolving. And so, with the unschooling thing, because, we're pretty sort of loose about it, my daughter doesn't have set bedtimes and has never had set bedtimes and things like that. So, and it's funny. I think one of the things that comes back is that she questions us, and throws stuff back at us, which sometimes is really disarming, because I could never have done that with my father. Like, to question him would be, it just wasn't done.
Yeah.
And so every now and again she'll do this, and we'll be talking about something, and she'll say, well, I don't want to do that. And I'm just like, what? Part of me is just like, oh, and then I go, wait, hang on a sec. Oh, that's right. We raised you to have this autonomy. We raised you to have this independence and to have your own voice and to be able to use your own voice. So, okay, good. That's fine. Let's talk about that then.
I know. That initial reaction, right? It's what?
Exactly. My initial reaction is, what the, how dare you question, I'm the parent. And then I'm like, well, no, wait a minute. No, that, let's back off from that a little bit. So I think that the surprise, to come back to your question, is sort of, mm-hmm. the surprise is how often that still comes up, even though we've been doing this for 14 years, there's still traces of that old paradigm that are sort of buried in me that I just wish I could expunge forever, just get rid of. But, that's part of my upbringing. And I think that we're sort of conditioned by our parents and by our upbringing. And certainly we can escape that largely, but there's always little traces of it in there. And so I think the surprises are things like that.
Yeah.
And then the other one that I really like is that when I'm really paying attention and I'm really listening, and I'm listening to my daughter and what she's saying and what she's kind of putting forth as her interests or what she wants to do, and I step out of the way and I back off and just say, okay, fine, that sounds great, and then let her just run with it. Amazing things happen. And that's what, and then it always really surprises me. I'm going, wow, that really worked out well. Like, why was I so hung up that somehow that wasn't going to work out, Because I think trust is such a huge part of this. I think it's the central piece, like learning to really trust that somehow or other, these kids who are unschooled, they're going to turn out fine, right? If you provide a nurturing environment, if you're supportive, if you can connect with them and not put up barriers and don't impose your own sort of authority on them, well, this is how it should be, and just allow it to naturally unfold, incredible things happen. So I'm always really surprised by that. Even now, after 14 years, I still get moments of like, wow, that was amazing. That was just such an incredible moment. Like, how did that happen?
I love that so much. I am still amazed, even now. I don't know if I added up, maybe we're 16 or 17 years, and my kids are all young adults now. But I am still amazed at the value. I think once I wrote, I was talking about not jumping in and adding my 2 cents all the time. Right. Because it was actually more valuable to not give my 2 cents, because stepping back and letting them take, like, you're supporting them and helping them accomplish what they want to accomplish. Like, because, when you say step back, you worry that people think, oh, okay, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to leave them to do their own thing. No, of course you help them. But Yes, they take things in the directions that work for them, and their directions that we could never have even imagined, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
that trust
And,
piece and why that's so important, right?
yeah, absolutely. And it is so easy, I find, as a parent to, as you said, like put your 2 cents in. Well, here's how I think it should be. Here's what I think you should do.
Here's what I think
Why
will
don't you do
happen.
this? Right. Why don't you do this? And then all of those, if you look really carefully at all those statements, what's really behind that is my expectation.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I think you should be doing.
Yeah.
Here's why I think you need to do this. But it's got really nothing to do with what they want. That's all about what I want or what I think they should be doing, right?
It's all part of our experience in the world, right? The way we've seen that play out within our paradigms, right? And our expectations and just the way we look at the world. But they look at the world in such a different way. And even the things they're choosing to do, they can be choosing them for reasons that we have no clue about. You know what I mean? They're trying to get something out of it that when they say they want to do something, our brain naturally jumps to, because they want to do this, because they want to, get this out of it. But no, it can be something completely different. And when you give them that space and trust to do it, you're right. Your mind is blown so many different times, isn't it?
Yeah. So I guess, it's a constant surprise all the time, and it's a constant balancing act between, knowing when to kind of step in a little bit and provide a bit more structure and guidance, and when to just completely back off and say, well, I'm here, I'll support this. I have no clue where this is going and I maybe don't even understand it, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And just trust that it's okay. And, it'll either work out or not work out. And that's okay too.
That's okay too.
Whether even if it doesn't work out, that's okay too. And because life isn't perfect. I mean, I've done many things in my life that I failed at miserably, and it's okay. I'm still here. I'm still surviving. It's part of my experience. It's part of being a human being. But, for some reason we get so hung up on wanting to control the outcome, getting attached to a certain situation and, this is how it should work out. It's like, well, no, we don't know how it's going to work out. Just go for it. Trust the universe, trust your innate sense of self, and amazing stuff happens. But that's a very, very hard thing to live in. It's a very hard paradigm to kind of be operating from all the time, because I think we're bombarded with messages, by the society in general about what should be happening and what you should be doing and what, how you should be living and what you should be buying and, what you should be pursuing, and all. It's just constant mess.
Exactly. And how bad it is to be wrong.
Right.
Right. That judgment of supposed failure is just everywhere. And, it's something from very early years, like you were saying, the paradigm that we grew up in, the environment we grew up in, is something that we're always working on, because that's a huge thing, judgment and shame as parenting tools, and just as tools to judge other people, right? They're so prevalent.
Yeah.
Okay, we better move on.
And then we could get pretty deep with this.
I know. I could keep going on just on that one question.
It's huge. Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into Class Dismissed, which is a wonderful documentary film that you released in 2015. So it is a fascinating story of a family's choice to pull their 2 children from school and the journey that follows as they choose to take their children's education into their own hands. So I really enjoyed it, obviously. And I was curious what inspired you to tell that story.
Yeah, well, so a couple of years into our own journey with homeschooling and unschooling, I was talking with a friend, and ironically, we were at the HSC conference again, and we just started talking, and I'd been reading everything I could find, and educating myself a little bit about this process and the different approaches to it all as we were sort of fumbling our way through our own experience. And I couldn't find any movies, and as a filmmaker, I'm like, how come there's no movies about unschooling or homeschooling? And there's some stuff on YouTube, there's certainly things you can find, but they're usually pretty short and not very extensive. And I couldn't find anything out there that was like a real sort of feature-length documentary addressing this. And I thought, this would be a really interesting project. And, I just love sort of throwing myself into big projects like this, especially when I think that they can't really be done. I thought, well, this is perfect. I'm gonna do this. Let's try to make this movie, right? So that's how the project really kind of began, and it was a crazy notion.
Yeah.
And it took way longer than I ever imagined. It took 4.5 years to make. It was a huge undertaking, but it was an absolutely amazing adventure and an incredible journey to be on. So that's how it all sort of really began. I felt like maybe if I could successfully pull it off, then maybe this film might end up being helpful to other people who are in the situation that I was finding myself in. We're just starting this journey. We're kind of looking around for information. There's lots of books and things to read, but you could get a pile of books this high, or you could watch a movie and get a lot of information too, right? So that was kind of the impetus, was to try to create something that would be helpful to people and answer a lot of questions along the way.
Yeah, no, and it does a great job. And, no matter where you are on your journey, still, it's really, I found it really helpful. I still really enjoyed it, even though, we've unschooled and the kids are officially graduated, if you want to say that. and in fact, I want to share one quote because it's near the end of the film, and I literally got goosebumps as she was sharing this. But the mom was saying, so this is near the end, I think I'm starting to kind of let go and relax a little bit. I'm amazed at how much I'm learning now. It's not that I have more opportunities to learn now, but I'm taking more opportunities to be part of learning and to engage with life in a more rich and fulfilling way. You could just see that light bulb moment. It's that return of curiosity for the parent. It's like that whole reawakening in the joy of learning and truly embracing. They get to the point where learning isn't just for kids. It's not just something kids are supposed to do. It's a lifelong thing that we all get to do.
Yes.
Right? Which then helps us, I think, actually better understand why this lifestyle is also a great way for our kids to learn. So it's like this circle that just keeps giving, right?
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So that's a really valuable step, though, isn't it, on the journey to get to that point?
Absolutely. And I really think, our kids are our greatest teachers. And so, this whole lifestyle, like you said, if you're giving, providing the opportunity for them to be free and to explore and to learn, then some of that has to come back at you. And, and it starts to break down those internal barriers that we've built about, well, I can't learn that. I'm too old or whatever, so all that starts to break down and go, let's learn about that. That's really cool. Oh, that's interesting. And suddenly that spark, that creative spark that I think we're all born with, and that somehow gets crushed in the schooling system and by society in general, is reignited. And so and part of this journey is that spark constantly is being reignited. And so that moment in the film that you mentioned was a terrific moment where Rachel really, it's like she really understood, wow, it's not just about my daughters, it's about me, and this whole idea of, let's learn and continue to grow together in the world. And, what a great, it's a great.
Yeah, that was spectacular. It's that moment that's where you realize it's a lifestyle.
Yes.
Right? It's not just
and that learning is ongoing. Learning is ongoing. We, again, in our society, we have this notion that there are the schooling years, as if those are the only years that you're supposed to learn anything, and the rest is just what I don't know, But that's absolutely not true at all. I mean, we're always learning. It's impossible not to learn.
Right?
It's impossible. You always are learning something. So it's an ongoing process. It's just a question of, are you aware of the fact that you're learning, or are you actively seeking out things to learn? And is that creative spark being constantly ignited, or is it being snuffed out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great questions.
Yeah.
And once you start asking those and start embracing it, it's beautiful. So what was your favorite part of the film? Do you have a favorite part?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I do, actually. I think one of my favorite parts in the film was, again, it's towards the end of the film where Anna, the older girl, is standing on the pier. And she finally has that realization that, it's the moment where she finally takes the reins of her own life and realizes that she is now in control, and she can learn whatever she wants to learn and follow whatever direction she wants. And that was an amazing moment for me, in a lot of respects, because as a documentary filmmaker, during the process of filming them, we spent about 2 years with them, and there was sometimes immense frustration that I could feel in myself about, God, she's just run with it, Anna. Like, what are you waiting for? Like, you've been given this opportunity now. Like, go for it. And she was waiting for instructions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it suddenly, I remember the light bulb in me going off one day when I'm like, oh, I see what's happening. All her life, she has been told when you do something and how you do something, and this is the time you do it. And she's been waiting now for those instructions to come, and they're not coming.
Yeah, yeah.
Because she's no longer in school, and Rachel's certainly not telling her what to do. So she's sort of like, well, what do I do? and part of me, while we were filming it, part of me just wanted to just jump in and like, come on, like give her a little poke, just do it. And I did actually say to her at one point, I said, Anna, you realize now you're completely free. You can do whatever you want. And I just sort of dropped that pebble in the pond and just left it at that. But it took a little bit longer for that to really sink in, I think. And then at some point, she finally had that realization, right after she decides she wants to maybe go to high school, and then pulls out again and realizes, no, I'm ready to run. And that was such a great moment. So that's my favorite moment in the film.
That was brilliant. In fact, it was between those two moments that I was going back and forth. Oh, which one? But so, yeah, no, that was spectacular when you saw that light bulb moment for her. And she really did a great job of explaining the pull, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of why she was considering high school and thinking about that. And so that revelation, she explained it really well to make sense as to how she got to that point, right? Versus just from one to the other. It wasn't like a light switch flipping on or off, Great moment, director.
Thanks.
Being able to put that together.
But that was the kind of amazing thing about, making the film. It's like, I didn't really know how it was all going to end up.
Yeah, yeah.
We just were there to document their process, and it was scary at times, especially when, she said, I want to go to high school. I'm like, well, there goes the movie.
Yeah, yeah.
You just killed my movie now. I didn't say that, of course, but I was thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And so I was already sort of thinking, well, what if she decides that that's what she wants, and how does that fit into the story, and how am I going to make that work in the film? And so it was this crazy ride, and again, that trust had to come up. Just trust the process, just back off, like just let her do a thing. And I said to Rachel, just let her do a thing. And Rachel says that I just have to let her make her decisions, and she's going to have to live with them.
Yeah.
And so I think that idea of trust in the process just came right up again, and we just had to roll with it, and it worked out that way in the end. So it was an interesting ride.
Oh, I can imagine. I was kind of taking that ride there as I was watching. So it was brilliant. And you're right. I was actually just imagining, you per se, but, people working on it. It's like, wow, there's a little twist for you, right?
Yeah.
That was really great. So now let's jump to this new documentary that you've been working on for a couple of years now, haven't you?
Yeah, about just over 2 years. Yeah. So I'm very excited about it. In the sort of home stretch of the film.
Yeah, yeah. So it's called Self-Taught, and I was hoping you could share a bit how you came to that. So what was the inspiration about behind this one?
Yeah, sure. So so Class Dismissed took me all over the country, and other countries in the world, like for screenings and things, which was fantastic. And so in all of those screenings and Q&As that I did, and in talking with people, I kept hearing the same questions come up over and over again, and the questions were, well, homeschooling or unschooling seems fine when they're little or when they're young, but what about when they're adults? Like, how do they turn out? If you've never been to school, how are you going to get into college if you want to go? Or how are you going to be able to get a job where you have to show up at 9 o'clock in the morning and, follow the rules and things like this, right? And these were really good questions. And I thought, wow, we didn't really address that in Class Dismissed. I mean, a little bit. We touched upon it, but it felt like, there's a whole lot more to say about this. And, and I think it's a question also personally, that I think about sometimes. Well, how's my daughter going to turn out? Those moments where I'm not trusting the process, where I'm questioning. Maybe I don't know. Maybe she should be doing more of this. How is she going to turn out? And so I thought, well, let's take those questions and see what we can do with answering them, and find. Let's talk to some adults who are unschooled or had very little formal schooling, and find out how are they doing. What do they think about their lives? Are they quote unquote successful? How do they define that? Because I think the way we define success in our society is very, very, very narrow.
Yeah.
So I was curious, how do they define success for themselves? Do they consider themselves successful even, or is it even that important to them? And do they feel that their unschooling helped or hindered them in any way in fulfilling the dreams and doing the things that they're doing now? So these were the questions that I was sort of armed with at the beginning of the film, that I resolved to try to get to the bottom of. And I found 6 really incredible young adults who answered my call to participate. And I've spent some time with each of them, and I've got some really terrific stories, I think, to tell in this film. It's a very, very different film to Class Dismissed, in that, it's not following one particular family's journey. They're kind of, the stories are very self-contained. So there's 6 very individual stories, but of course there's lots of parallels and lots of connections, and similarities and differences as well. And then it's sort of all interwoven with, I have Peter Gray in the movie, who talks a lot about, self-directed learning and his research around that and so on. And Blake Bowles is also in the film. And, I wanted to really focus on the young adults. It's really their story. I didn't want too many quote unquote experts in this film.
Yeah.
In Class Dismissed, there was a lot. You had Sandra Dodd and, and all these different people, and all piping in, Pat Ferenga and everything. And that, that was good. But I felt like with this film, I really want it to be about these particular individuals. Let's really hear their stories. So that's kind of how the film is structured currently. And I think it's working really well, and I'm really happy about it. And I can't wait to get it out there.
That makes so much sense. Like the point of having the experts, because, you were following this family's journey, and she was doing that research, right? That was kind of the information she was gathering at the same time through that process. So, right. Adding that as part of that story made a lot of sense. As does, once they're now young adults and they've been, they're looking kind of back on that journey and talking about where they are now, etc. Yeah, the expert advice isn't as necessary, because now you're looking at what they've lived versus, right? Right.
And they each talk about, they each reflect a little bit on their childhoods and what it was like to be unschooled and how they feel about that. And, and sort of reflecting upon how that has shaped who they have become. Yeah. I think that's the sort of the process. It's interesting to kind of explore that and to see, well, how do they really feel about it now? And do they have any regrets about it at all? Or do they think they could have done it differently? Or, and so these are all the kind of questions I put out there and get different responses from each of them. So,
yeah, I really do love that, because, first off, when you were doing all the screenings and people were asking all those questions, right?
Yeah.
When you take a beat to not feel defensive about it, as representing unschooling or whatever, these are, like you said, these are great questions, and they're questions we all ask. Like you say, they come to you, they come to me. These are human questions, and it's not about feeling bad about the fact that I'm questioning myself again, right? It's human nature. It's
Absolutely.
good to question, right? It's not that you failed unschooling because you're wondering how it's going to work in the future. These are questions to ask, and it's interesting. And also, as you said, asking about regrets and stuff, like that might be a bad thing. No, things have always, some things go well in our lives, some things don't. When we look back, maybe as what, I would have made a different choice, knowing now what I know now. Right. Right. These are all part of learning, and these are all the experiences together that make us the unique person we are. So it's not about even judging them negatively or anything. It's just adding to our picture, right, of what unschooling can be.
Right. In fact, I think if you weren't questioning and asking all those questions, then you would maybe have a bit of a problem. you know, it's super important to always be questioning. And I think that's one of the great things about this sort of unschooling lifestyle is that there is, because, it's not, there's no roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you follow the traditional schooling path, there's a roadmap. You go to this school, you do these things, you do these subjects, you do this, you get these grades, you move on to the next school. There's another roadmap, and this is a roadmap through our life, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
If you choose to take that route, and if you choose to step outside of that, then there's no roadmap, and so you're kind of winging it.
Yeah.
And in fact, and that's why I think the questions really start to come up. But to me, that's so, being in that place of not knowing is the most intimate place you can be, because you're so fully engaged with life, right? Because you don't know. So you have to start questioning, well, what about this? And what about that? And have I looked at that? And what have I explored about this? That's living.
Yeah.
As opposed to just saying, oh, I'm supposed to go do this. Oh, I'm supposed to go do that. Oh, I guess I'm going to do this now, right? There's no, you're not rubbing up against life. You're not crashing into things. And so I think that, that's, to me, that's the most exciting part of this lifestyle, is just crashing into stuff, figuring it out, I don't know what's going on half the time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But I feel alive by that. I feel engaged and enraptured with it. It's like, because otherwise I'm numb.
That was a huge revelation for me, right? Because and we were a few years into unschooling probably, when I suddenly had the realization that, because you're always like, oh, if I could just like solve X, Y, and Z, it would finally be peaceful, right? And that was supposed to be my goal, that like all the problems would be worked out, and then we could finally relax and just live. And finally, the revelation, like, oh, that's life, all these questions and bumping up against things, and just like, oh, well, should I take that step? Should we do this? And that was all good. That was life, and those weren't going to end. There wasn't, some little white peaceful room sitting there just waiting for me to get there if I could just figure everything out.
Yeah, it's that idea that if we could just get this and this, and then those would be the pieces we need, and everything would be fine. But that's just so not what reality is. Reality is messy.
Yeah,
life is messy. We're going to crash into stuff. We're going to rub up against things, and that's part of living. And we can't. There's only so much control that we can have. We think we have control, but we actually have almost none.
Yeah.
So again, coming back to trust. Trusting that somehow or other, the universe provides what we need. If we're open to it, if we're receptive, if we're responsive, amazing stuff happens, not just for our kids, but for ourselves. And that's why I love the unschooling lifestyle so much, is because we're constantly thrown into that whirlpool of, we don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
And wow, isn't life incredible? It's so interesting. There's never a dull moment.
Right. And like you said earlier, pulling it all around. We're students of our children, really. That's how I learned it, was by seeing them, these bumps in the road and the things they ran up against. They weren't the end of the world to them.
Right.
They weren't seeing this as failure or anything. It was like, oh, there's a new fact or a new something, and here we go. Yeah. And just seeing them engage so fiercely with their lives, it woke me up to doing that as well, to remember what that was like and embrace everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So you are in the production home stretch right now with Self-Taught. And you're running a Kickstarter campaign to help with the final stages. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to share a bit of information about the campaign and where people could check it out, because I think it's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll send you links that maybe you could post too. But so it's on Kickstarter. If you just go on Kickstarter and search for Self-Taught, it'll come up. And so it's an active campaign right now. We have about 14 days left, so the time is ticking. And unfortunately, with making independent films is a pretty labor-intensive and expensive process. I have no big funding from film companies or anything. This is entirely a project, a self-taught project in a sense. So, I really need the support of the community to get behind the film and support it as they did with Class Dismissed. And, Class Dismissed could never have done what it's done without the support of the community. And I'm eternally grateful to everyone that got behind the film and supported it. And, it's gone out there and I get messages almost still to this day from people saying, oh, I saw Class Dismissed and it changed my life. And now we're homeschooling and we love it. And I'm like, and to me, that's like, wow, that's so great,
Yeah.
So anyway, the campaign's running. We have only 14 days left. If we don't meet our goal, then I don't know what I'm going to do. I have to, somehow I've got to get the funds together to finish the film. And, I've put in a couple of years of work on it now. I mean, I don't pay myself on these projects. This is all, this is a labor of love because I really passionately believe in this lifestyle and passionately believe in the subject matter. So I really encourage people if they want to support it to get in there and do what you can, and I know it's tough sometimes, for people, but anything helps, and every dollar helps. And I'm hoping we can make the goal and I can get to finish the film, in which case it would be coming out in spring of next year.
Okay.
So
that's awesome.
I have a finished cut of the film pretty much. So, and it's feeling good. There's just a lot of loose ends to tie up, but particularly the biggest thing is music, getting music in there. You have to pay for music. It's not free. I have a composer in mind, and I really want to be able to pay him what he's worth, to write some fabulous music for the film and really put the icing on the cake, so to speak, as I say in the pitch, so.
That's great. So, I will we'll have links to it in the show notes. And when the episode goes out, we'll share it because I would love to see it come out. And you're right. There are always these pieces where you're working with other people. Like even when you're putting so much of your own heart and soul into a project, when you're asking other people to be involved, it's their work, right? So you want to be able to support them that way as well.
Of course. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So our last question, Jeremy, as an unschooling dad, what piece of advice would you like to share with dads who are maybe considering or just starting out on this journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's challenging, I think, and the risk of stereotyping.
Mm-hmm.
I think that generally speaking, it's the mom that's going to take on the bulk of this journey with their kids. Again, I know that's a stereotype, but generally, I think that's fairly true. And so the dads often, I feel like, get sort of shortchanged a little bit, or they get a little bit, they're not quite as in the picture as they should be. They're out working, and I've run into this too in my working life, where all of the conversation at work revolves around school and what the kids are doing at school. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting around the lunch table and stuff, and everyone's going, "Oh, my kid's this grade and that thing," and I can't contribute to that conversation because my daughter's not in school. Yeah. So and so there's this feeling of feeling kind of left out a little bit, and then you come home from work and it's like, well, the kids, what have the kids been doing? And the house is a disaster. There's Legos and there's toys, there's stuff everywhere. It's just looked like a bomb landed in the house, and that can be very, very hard, I think. Yeah. For new dads who are just starting out this journey and trying to figure out what does this mean. And I think, societally too, there's this message that, the father is supposed to be the provider. And, even in this day and age, it seems like a 1950s thing, but, it's like, you're going to be the provider and go to work and pay for the family and all of that. And I think that messaging is still in there. So for dads who want to step outside of that and question that, it's really challenging. So advice, I would say, just be really open to the process. Again, try to really find that place of trust that somehow or other, you can come home from work and the house is a mess and your kids have been laying around reading all day or something. And you think, well, what have they really learned? They've learned an amazing amount, actually. And just try to kind of retune the dial a little bit. And spend time to connect with them when you come home from work, make sure that you have time to connect and listen to what they've been up to and let that in and, be free of judgment, because it's hard in the workplace. There's so much of that sort of success driven, get the job and get the promotion and make the money and all of this. And all of that's just being bombarded all the time. And to come home to this sort of free form, like crazy, wild unschooling thing can be really challenging.
Yeah, you're
So
living
I
in
think
both
that's part of
worlds
it,
all the time, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think that's part of it, and so yeah, I think the main message would be just to trust, trust your children, really trust your children, and be there to support them in whatever way you could possibly can, and learn from them. Really allow that mirroring to happen. For me, my daughter is a mirror to me. When I look at her, she just mirrors stuff back to me, whether I want it or not.
Yeah.
And so I see things about myself in her that sometimes are hard to see, and I go, wow, that's really interesting. Now I have to shift something. I got to tune that dial a little differently there, because she just reflected it right back at me.
Yeah.
and that's difficult. So I just be open, I guess, and trust.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that. That's a huge, just being open, wider, right?
Yeah.
To seeing what's happening, rather it's that letting go of the expectations a little bit, isn't it? Letting go of
Yeah. And
that.
yeah, I think that sort of attitude can be applied to everything in life. It's like I think as we sort of go through this journey of life, things tend to get narrower and narrower and narrower, or they can. Like we're forced into these little funnels,
Yeah.
and to me, the challenge is to break that funnel down and actually get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and let more and more and more in. Let more of the world in, not less. The more of the world you let in, the richer your life becomes. And it's hard because we have all these messages. Oh, well, you're not supposed to do that, or you're supposed to be doing this, or so break down those barriers and include that. Include all the messages that say you should be doing this. Allow those messages in, and then question them.
Brilliant.
Right.
Yeah.
So don't try to push them away.
Yeah.
Because I think that actually funnels you and gets you even more narrow-minded.
It does,
It's
because
like,
you're trying to ignore.
So society or this person or my parents or whoever it is saying, oh, your kids should go to school. Okay, well, let's allow that in.
Mm-hmm.
Allow that discontent in, and sit with that, and now just expand it, and make your container bigger. Right. So that now you've got room for those things in there too. And you keep making your container bigger, and more stuff comes in, and you make your container even bigger. And I think that's the journey of unschooling, is just allowing as much of the world in as possible, and seeing what works and discarding what doesn't, but at least allowing it all to kind of percolate together in one big pot.
Because you're building your view of the world, right? And you learn so much more, and you make stronger connections that make more sense to you when all the bits of the world are in there to consider, rather than just having this narrow focus. And like back to when we were talking about the questions that you were asking for self-taught, right? It's like, if you don't consider those, if you feel like that's a failure and you're trying to avoid that, you're not, you're like you said, you're just narrowing your experience, you're narrowing your view of the world. And not only does that not do yourself a service, because you're not learning, you're totally focused, but the energy that it takes eventually to try and keep all that noise or all those other voices out, because you're going to have to do that forever. Whereas if you open up your world and you connect that, and you figure out, why they think that, and you understand where they're coming from, you understand how that makes sense to them, and you understand why it doesn't make sense for you, then
Right.
you can live in the world with all of it. Right.
Right. I mean, I think you said something really great there about, the energy that it takes to resist and to push away these things that don't fit, or that are sort of encroaching upon our worldview or whatever. It takes so much energy that you end up robbing yourself of that creative spirit that we talked about, that igniting that spirit, that we all have in us. And so it gets snuffed out.
Yeah.
And then your life is tiny, because it's like, oh, well, I don't want to push this away and push that away. It's like, no, invite all of it in. Just keep making the container bigger. Because, we all have the potential for just vast amounts of compassion and empathy, and, but we don't use it. We want to separate ourselves, or they're different from us, or this is that, And so we just become narrower and narrower and narrower. And I think we should be doing the opposite, and that's what I love about unschooling is it kind of, in a sense, it sort of forces you to do that because there's no roadmap, as I said, you're sort of winging it sometimes and learning to trust. And ultimately the rewards are so much greater because as you begin to go through this process and you see that things miraculously work out, these kids turn out great. They're amazing human beings. Like, how could that be? It's mind blowing. What do you mean you never went to school and now you're doing a PhD in biology? What? That makes no sense, but it does make sense. And so, and when you really start to see that, oh yeah, that does make sense, then all of a sudden, it becomes easier to kind of navigate that sense of unknowing or not knowingness,
Yeah. No.
So anyway.
That's amazing. And we could talk for ages, but I want to thank you so much. I know, because it's brilliant and it's so true. It's spectacular.
Well, I get so fired up by these conversations.
I know. We see both of us using our hands all over the place.
I know. I just want to keep going. It's like, yeah, because I already feel a certain sense of expansion happening.
I know. I'm ready to get to things.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Jeremy. It was
You're
awesome.
so welcome.
I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it was. And I know I will share the Kickstarter link and everything. Is there any other place where people can connect with you online?
Well, I'll shoot you a quick email after this with the website for Class Dismissed and for Self-Taught and the Kickstarter URL. And that's about it. That's where they can find me.
Brilliant.
Hovering around in the fringes.
The fringes there. Busily working away. Yay. All right. Have a wonderful day, Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Pam. Really nice to connect with you.
It was lovely. Thank you.
And thank you for everything that you do, too. It's wonderful to have people like you out there adding another voice to the conversation, letting people know that they have choices, so that, you don't have to have this little narrow view. It's like, open up, people.
Open up.
Yeah, right.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.